So in this portion of the tutorial, we'll be looking at how to move our drawing into the composite drawing phase. So this is the drawing that we currently have from part 2 of the tutorial. Just some of the colors have been a little bit adjusted after some reconsideration, but now the focus of part 3 of this tutorial series is to integrate some additional layers which then provide a background for this drawing, and this drawing, this central element in the composition, starts reacting against these other elements. So of course we're referencing the work of Brian Cantley, who does this extensively in 2D drawing. You can see kind of the various ways in which he engages the background, the way he layers hatches and introduces various information. You could look at some of the details of his work. Here you can see projected shadows. You can see various notation in the drawing, and of course lots and lots of layering. And for Cantley, he does it manually on Mylar with several sheets of Mylar. So first, what we'll be doing is we'll be introducing that yellow background. So for that, what we'll do is we'll actually go back to our 2D composition, and we'll take an element that we like, that we think will work well for this purpose. So what we'll do is we'll actually take this. So actually, I'll drag. So in effect, what we'll be doing is we'll actually be taking this information, and then just whenever we export, we just want to make sure that our layers are different. So we'll just put this quickly on a different layer. So also white layer. So we'll have two different layers actually. So we're just going to export this into Illustrator. And then for us, the scale doesn't matter. For this, so you can see here's where it exported. As long as you're exporting close to the origin with a reasonable scale, you should have no problem bringing the drawing back into view. So we'll call this yellow background. I'll put these 2 layers. We'll make sure that paste remembers layers is on by clicking here, so that we can copy and paste this effectively into our drawing. So here is how it came in. Now you may notice that the lines of this object are at a 45-degree angle. That's kind of how the section was cut. So what we'll do is we'll actually take this and distort it. So Illustrator also has a shear command, not a command but function. So but let's see, transform shear. So vertical, yes. Not quite sure why. Maybe it's because of this. So actually, yeah, so you have to specify the shear angle at the top, and you maintain axis as 0. So this is now our new sheared drawing. You can delete all of them. Now what we can do is we can move it to the background. We'll make sure that all of our layering is in order. So make sure that, and then we have to specify kind of where it lies. So I think around here should be fine. So something like this. Now that we have that in there, we can see how we might want to limit the extents of this thing. So what we'll do is we'll actually draw a rectangle that cuts somewhere down there, and we'll actually use this rectangle to clip this entire layer. And in the meantime, if we lock the rectangle, we can actually drag these around and further transform them as needed. So of course the white color won't serve us very well, so we'll turn our reference image back on, and we will actually use the clipping mask to introduce a slightly darker yellow. So something like this. Something so that our section stands out above it. But to differentiate the line work, we'll actually use this top level yellow. And then these, we will actually make these the same color as the background, thereby cutting the background out. Now there's various ways of doing this. I mean, you could use Window and Pathfinder, it's right here, to subtract out those areas, but in this case it's simple enough to do this. However, just so that this background graphic doesn't interfere with our drawing, what we may seek to do actually is select our outline of this guy, then we can duplicate it, we can drag it here, and then we'll actually subtract it like this. Oops, subtracted the wrong thing from the wrong thing. Actually, this should work. So as long as so let's see. So this is above, this is below. So we successfully subtracted it, and now we can reapply. Reapply the clipping mask. Then we just have to set the color again for it. Okay. So we're now at this stage of our drawing. So now we would like to add a couple more elements to fill out the bottom over here. So let's move back to Rhino. So, I mean, generally, what will work here compositionally is something that reacts against the blue, because still there's too much blue in this composition. Color-wise, it's best if it's a little bit more distributed. So we think maybe a yellow shape down here would help us compositionally. So you can actually go back into your Make 2D. You can drag an element or a piece of it over. You can make sure that it's closed, or to the best of your ability. And then what we'll actually do is we will proceed to curve boolean everything. Kind of just to use a shape that's based on the geometry that we already are working with. But that adds a little bit more richness to the to our drawing. So I mean, it's okay if it's not perfect. It doesn't need to be. So, well. Okay. So I mean, for us, we really just want the outline here. So once you do that selection, this will be the shape that we'll be using. So we can just take this. But first and foremost, just make sure that it's a closed curve. So cell closed curve. So this both comes online, gets highlighted. So we do know that this is a closed curve and that we can use it in Illustrator for hatches. If your curve isn't closed, you can make 2D it. Use the command close curve, and from there you can start figuring out where it's open and troubleshooting it. In part 2, I go over some of that kind of workflow. So we will call this yellow hatch. We'll bring this in here. Of course, it helps to lock everything. So let's see here. So then we just have to pick something that works for us compositionally. We want some overlap, just for a little bit. Then you can see what it's starting to look like. So maybe something like this will work for us, a little bit bigger. And then of course if an element doesn't work, we can just move it closer. And basically play with it until it's really working for us. Until we move this above here. But we're not going to be using a fill. What we'll be using is instead a hatch. So we'll go to swatches, and then we will click on patterns, basic graphics, basic graphic lines. We'll go for a 50%, something like that. But the black is starting to compete with our shadow, so what we'll actually do is we will edit the color of this hatch. So first what we'll do is we will select one of these, go to Object, Pattern, Edit Pattern. So you can change the color here, but we forgot to get our color code, so make sure you get your color code of the yellow that you want. Of course, please don't use yellow unless you're already using it in your project. This gamma, as described in part 2, it was derived from a photograph. And since I've used blue previously, this color scheme works for me. But you can see that when we changed that, all of the patterns changed. So we just want to make sure that we go back here. We hit the shadow pass. and that for this we can actually get it back to black just by clicking on the shadow. But just make sure that you're working with your fill and the quick shadow. So here we go. Now we're getting pretty close. You can see that this is appearing. I guess it's fine actually. It's not too muddy. But the reason for that is that this layer, this layer over here, it has a 40% opacity. So this is kind of where you can start adjusting this, and this starts helping with the layering. So now that we're at this stage in the tutorial, we see that this looks kind of dense. So what we'll do is we'll integrate another shape in an effort to affect this. So for that shape, I mean, we'll just take a top view of our model. We'll make 2D it, and then similarly we will cut something out using curved boolean. We'll hatch it. So once we have that, we can export it. So similarly, no scale really needed. Yellow hatch. We'll call it subtraction. So it's all the way over there, since it was pretty far from. So this will have to work for us. So we do compound path make. So I made the compound path. And then we can position it right above, but we can position it right above the yellow hatch. So let's see where it actually is. So we want to make sure that it sprawls out a little bit so that it has the maximum kind of impact. But so with these hatches, what looks really nice above them is actually a gradient. So what we'll do is we will apply a gradient to this. So let's see, where's our... Here's our gradient tool. So when we go to gradient, we'll do a linear gradient. Maybe we turn on gradient simplicity. So we'll do linear gradient, and then here we'll actually go from blue to yellow. So that'll make a nice transition. So we'll get the color code for the blue. Once we have the hex code for the blue, we can then double click this slider. It's important to switch it to CMYK or else it won't let you use color. So then see, we're starting with blue now. So we can hit yellow, get the code for yellow. Similarly, RGB, yellow, perfect. However, this gradient obviously is not quite done. So what we'll do here is we will specify 0% opacity. So now you can really see that gradient start to work for us, how it transitions. the hatch over to the background over here. So that's a nice effect to always keep in mind. And of course, now that you have it here, you can go back to the gradient tool and you can start adjusting, you know, where the fall off is. You can adjust the rotation of the angle of the gradient. So, but for our purposes, this is pretty much perfect. I'll actually rotate it. So, and just a quick note, I have a clipping mask. So just a rectangle, clipping a master layer, and so, or else, you know, your objects start to fall outside. So unless you want to trim everything, which is very difficult in Illustrator, I recommend that you put a clipping mask around your artboard, just so it's not distracting as you work. So now, we'll add in one last element. So we can see that the composition here is, I mean, it's actually fairly balanced. I wouldn't say it's not balanced, but this corner could perhaps use some activation. So what we'll do now is we'll go back to Rhino. We will take some pieces that we don't have in our axon view, so the ones that we removed, which for me are these pieces. And then we'll flip them around so that you can see the inside of the section. And then we'll also do the section cuts so that we can, using the section command, just like previously, so that we know kind of what should be filled. And then we'll look at it in an Arctic. And for this, we're not going to use textures. And then for Arctic, be sure to, well, actually we'll be using the Arctic copy where we remove the background per tutorial, per this tutorial, but part 2. We'll select the curve. We'll hide the curves. We'll cell the points. We'll hide the points, just so that we have this clean render. Then we'll do capture the file. So just make sure that you're working at an adequate resolution. Click OK, and then we'll save it as a PNG, which it already is. And then here it is in PNG, and you can see that the background is transparent, and Windows renders that as black. So then we'll actually take this into Photoshop and trim it, as I already have done, so that it's cropped to the adequate size. After that, we'll make 2D this. This model. So after the make 2D runs, this is what we get. So the only kind of information that we'll be using from this will actually just be the sectional information. So this is very, very important. So just make sure that you kind of go through the curve boolean or make 2D separately from the previous step, your section, as we already have done in tutorial in part 2. And then what we'll do is, actually let me clear this really quickly. So here's our sectional information that we curve boolean just to make really clean curves. But then what we're interested in actually is the negative space in here. So our task now is to highlight all of this negative space, this black space. So we'll go back into our Rhino. So while the curve boolean is processing, we're going to click here, here, just following, and whatever's covered by the section doesn't really matter, but we can bring it in anyway. So then I believe this also. So once we have this, just make sure to group your curves. And we will actually put them on top of this, just so everything is in one place. So now you can see we have black for the section, and then we have blue for the void space. So we'll only take this information, export it to Illustrator. We're not exporting the scale anymore, since this is more composite. And we need things various scales. So now that we have this here, we'll say composite section. We'll bring this under the same layer. We can cut it. So composite section probably goes above the yellow, but above the first yellow, but below the second yellow. So now that we have it, I'll temporarily disable our clipping mask. Let's bring in our shadow. This is our Arctic viewport that we captured. We'll take the width of this, and then just match these guys up. Just of course it's below, it's easier to match it up. So okay, now we have our base, and we have some additional things. Looking at this and just how the overall directionality is flowing, it's best to actually mirror this. So it's fine. Now that we have it mirrored, we have to kind of position it just so that it fits just right. I think this could be pretty fun actually, this kind of reading. Perhaps even more. But of course we don't want to compete with the main element. So right now we're absolutely competing, so what we'll do is, this composite, what we'll do is we'll take the, what is this? I think this is the section. We'll take the section cut and we'll actually make the section cut the same color. So this now ensures that this is also kind of a test on whether or not our render matches up perfectly. It's definitely difficult to match it up. Exactly. And so for that, what we'll do is we'll take the section cut, copy the color code, we'll actually give it a stroke as well. Something thin, yeah, 1 point. So what this effectively does is it joins the background with the section. So already this helps tremendously. We'll call this void. So we'll take our void spaces, and we'll make these the same color as the background. So, and in order for all of this to read a little bit better, I'll actually have to get a tiny bit bigger. So, and then finally, the last thing we'll do is we'll take this layer. We'll start looking at the different blending modes. So what we'll actually do is we will select lighten. So when you select the layer and you adjust the blending mode, you can also adjust the opacity, so to really make it fade away and be part of the background. But of course, you know, there's some elements compositionally that leave it to be desired. So I mean, first we want to make sure that the blue kind of starts affecting the yellow over here, and that these geometries read, and also want to make sure that there's a little bit of an overlap there, so that gives it a little bit more of a richness. And we can, if we're pleased with this kind of reading, then we can leave it as such, but we can also start adjusting the other elements in here. So to have it work exactly, precisely for what we're trying to do compositionally. So. Well, these could go a bit further. So, in essence, this is a composite drawing. And the reason it's a composite drawing is because it's not just a regular axonometric drawing or even an axon split drawing, which is already basically, I mean, a composite drawing, since you're combining two drawings together and you're starting to composite them. But the compositing techniques really come in as you start to add various layers to the drawing, which helps you keep a very keen attention to the color balance of the overall drawing, to the reading. So these hatches, they help bring out this form right there by kind of affecting the blue background and allowing these forms to stand out rather. And then also providing various other readings of the geometry. So instead of this section, it could have been an elevation, it could have been kind of any kind of other extracted geometry. That doesn't matter so much as long as it serves an overall purpose compositionally. Also, just be mindful to use the same kind of lines. So here we have diagonal lines. So as the composition is likely to be much more successful if those are maintained. Diagonal lines in general are prized in photography. So, and this was the first iteration for the tutorial. So I really hope that this is helpful for the class, and it allows us to venture into a little bit more of the composite techniques instead of the simple kind of axon projection drawings that we've been doing so far. Thank you guys for the attention to this tutorial, and I wish you luck and speed as you create these drawings.